Houthis, an Iranian-backed faction in Yemen who controls most of the country's major population centers, declared that they would begin attacking Israeli, American, and British merchant shipping nearby them in the Red Sea, in support of their ally Hamas in Gaza. Those attacks
guys, look at me. I look different. I look like I'm not like super tired.
Something incredible is rising out of what used to be the middle of nowhere in the Sahara.
It's because I prep myself so I don't look freaking like my head exploded. I actually look
For a desert.
Bopper.
28 miles or 45 kilometers east of Egypt's current capital city, Cairo. The Egyptian government is busy building a massive and exorbitantly expensive brand new capital city from scratch. An official new name for this new capital city is not yet, so it so far has only been referred to by its placeholder name, the new administrative capital. Once it's completed, the Egyptian government plans to fully relocate all of its
So it's kind of like how India is created a whole new capital, New Delhi. Interesting.
Offices and personnel from the old capital in Cairo, and the government will encourage every foreign country who has an embassy in Egypt to relocate their own staff to the new capital as well. The government hopes that the new capital will one day be home to 6.5 million residents after it's finished being built, which will almost certainly make it the largest new settlement founded anywhere in the world in the 21st century.
That's
if
madness.
it all goes according to plan. But for now, despite all of the grandeur and scale, this massive, glittering new capital city rising out of the empty desert remains about as empty as the arid environment that surrounds it, while construction has gotten itself far behind schedule and enormously over budget. When the new capital was initially proposed back—
this is the thing, right? This is like any construction. Something that I noticed with construction, because I kind of like watching these type of videos about construction and projects and whatnot as well, is that like they always never ever go like in budget. Like they never complete with their budget. It's always like way over their freaking like actual budget. A good example would be the interstate by the US. It was completed, it's completed, the interstate, it's great, woohoo. But it was way over budget, dude. Way over budget.
In 2015, the Egyptian government claimed that it would all be constructed for only $45 billion and largely finished by 2022. But now—
Dude, $45 billion. Yo, man. The GDP of my country is like $6 billion, man.
2024, only a handful of government ministries have been moved in. No foreign embassies have relocated at all, and construction is still ongoing, while the cost for only phase 1 of the new capital has already ballooned to more than $58 billion. $13 billion over budget. There are many reasons why, but a big part of it is simply because of the sheer scale and opulence that's being put on display by the government here. Phase 1 of the new capital has included the development of multiple different districts within the new city that'll serve various different purposes, and many of them include some of the most outrageous and absurd buildings ever conceived of in human history. One of these districts arising from the sands is the government district that'll become the Egyptian state's brand new nerve center. Once completed, this district is intended to become the new headquarters for 34 of Egypt's government ministries.
Interesting.
In addition to the country's 2 chambers of parliament,
Interesting.
the House of Representatives and the Senate. At 550 acres in size, this government district will be approximately 80% larger than the National Mall is within America's capital, Washington, D.C., and it'll contain—
I will never understand, like it's so weird seeing cities in deserts, man. It's just so weird to me. Like, oh my goodness gracious, dude, nah.
contains several more imposing buildings than are present in Washington, including the world's tallest flagpole. Dubbed the Cairo flagpole, it was already raised in 2021 and stands 207 meters or 680 feet high, considerably taller than the Washington Monument is in D.C., while the flag it flies is roughly the same size as 2 standard basketball courts placed side by side.
Wow.
Just to the north
that
of this
is
sprawling
really
government
big.
district is another
How do
district
you
of
raise that
equivalent
flag?
size, but which is fully dedicated to only housing the new presidential palace complex, which will become the new home residence of Egypt's president.
Is Egypt a dictatorship? Or is it not? I think it's not, but it's super corrupted, right?
The building that encompasses the presidential palace itself is enormous at around 50,000 square meters of total floor space, which, for perspective, is roughly 10 times larger than the White House in Washington, D.C. that serves as the American president's residence.
Why do you need a presidential palace that big? Oh, okay.
And leaked photos of the inside of the Egyptian palace have revealed what appears to be an ornate throne hall that resembles the opulent palaces of Islamic sultans from centuries past, that has allegedly been decorated with solid gold. And then
What is Egypt? Is Egypt? I'm pretty sure Egypt is a democracy, is it not?
the walls that surround the palace complex will include a series of gardens that sprawl across an estate more than 2 square kilometers in area. That's roughly 4 times as large as the walled-off Vatican City is that's the home of the Pope. The new presidential palace
Wow.
complex alone has reportedly cost the Egyptian state somewhere around $3 billion to construct, which
That is literally most of the GDP of my country. What? No, that's half the GDP of my country. Holy.
puts it on a
Dude. $3 billion? Dude. $3 billion? I don't think y'all understand how much money $3 billion is. I don't think y'all realize how much money $3 billion is. Dude. Actually, there's a wonderful video on YouTube that you could go and watch. Go watch it after this video because I want me to watch that. But there's a wonderful video actually that you could go watch where someone will literally kind of demonstrate how much money $1 billion is compared to $1 million. But for me to demonstrate here, dude, $3 billion can literally house a country, a small country. Like. Dude, $3 billion is comparable to a lot of economies in the Caribbean. I'm not even kidding. You can have... Freaking out. That freaking Sprite. But you can have, like, economies, functioning economies with $3 billion. As long as you have the proportional population to sustain that. But, like, that's insane. But that's actually insane when you really actually think about it.
London. That's the home of the British monarch, and which has independently been valued by appraisers to be worth approximately $5 billion.
What the heck? $5 billion. I never knew they were. I thought the royal family was all of it was worth around like a little under $1 billion. I didn't know they were. Whoa, $5 billion. Because I know that the royal family, they have like, they own so much. Okay, they own like so freaking much, like a lot. Like, even like a lot of people don't know this, but they literally still own like land outside of just the UK. They own lands and literally like the Commonwealth realms. They own land. They call it what the heck do they call it? I think they call it like royal lands. No, they call it crown lands. Yeah, because they own a bunch of land in Barbados as well, which is my country, which is where I'm from. Because Barbados is a Commonwealth realm, which is just a fancy way of just saying British Dominion. But it was a Commonwealth realm until 2021. However, even after the monarchy was abolished, yeah, they still own all of that land. The government legally cannot confiscate that land. Okay. A good example of the land that they own actually would be the Parliament buildings. You could just Google Barbados Parliament buildings and you'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, that is not owned by us. That is owned by the royal family. Well, technically, it was owned by us because the royal family was the head of state of our country. It's just that the government decided to do a uncanny move and did a completely undemocratic vote to abolish a monarchy, something that the people in the country has kind of voiced their opinion of. Like, why would you completely abolish monarchy without the people's decision? But anyways, let's continue. This video is super long,
southern end of
so
the
I
government
don't want to talk
district
too
is
much.
Egypt's new Islamic cultural center, a mega mosque that is also sometimes officially referred to as the Egyptian Grand Mosque. This is inaugurated only last year in 2023. The Grand Mosque was a huge undertaking, drawing from traditional medieval Egyptian Mamluk Islamic architecture.
That's awesome.
It covers an area of 250,000 square meters and can accommodate more than 131,000 worshippers at a given time, which not only makes it the largest mosque in Egypt, but the largest mosque on the entire African continent, and the largest mosque in the Middle East outside of Saudi Arabia's holiest mosques in Mecca and Medina. The Egyptian Grand Mosque broke multiple world records when it was completed, including the heaviest and largest chandelier in the world, that's more than 53,000 pounds or 24,000 kilograms in weight, with a diameter of 72 feet or 22 meters, and the highest pulpit in the world that's nearly 17 meters or 55 feet tall. And it's not even the only mega religious building.
Here's the thing though, yeah, Egypt's economy, and I'm just saying this out of naked knowledge, meaning that I don't know too much, but Egypt's economy, yeah, I don't think it could handle this.
Been constructed in the new capital. There's also the newly built Nativity of Christ Cathedral nearby, a mega church that's the biggest church that's ever been constructed in the Middle East.
Again, like, it sounds cool, and you know, I would be like shocked and awe. But again, you need to look at Egypt's economy. Like how in the world is it? Like, like. That sounds really, really, really awful. It's kind of like sucking a person that's starving dry out of nutrients inside of their body to make food with it, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Like imagine a person starving, you like cut meat off of their legs to cook it, to feed them. Like, your body's gonna burn that meat anyways. Like, why are you cutting it off? And yeah, I don't know. This is just bad. This is just bad. This is just bad. I know it.
Orthodox community, and the construction of the cathedral so close to the Grand Mosque within the new capital was deliberately designed as a symbol of peaceful coexistence between Egypt's two largest religious communities. Well, it's estimated that around 90% of Egypt's contemporary population are followers of Sunni Islam.
Like that.
The remaining 10% of the population are estimated to be Coptic Orthodox Christian.
So I have a few Christians in my comments whenever I do my Islamic reactions that don't really seem to understand what not respecting other people's religion mean. I don't care how you believe in God. I just care that you believe in God. That's all I care about. Okay? That's all I care about. I believe God is a merciful God, and God will even the Bible literally says God is going to be merciful to those who He deems fit. And I take that logic as, okay, well, you know, you might believe in God in this way, but you know, you might be misunderstood. You might not understand it, right? And I think God is going to be merciful towards you. I have a bunch of Christians, not too many Christians, but just a minute amount of Christians in my comments sometimes, and they're just kind of just outright rude towards Islamic people. I'm like, dude, like, gotta hear that. I've had I don't know. I don't really had any rude Islamic people in my comments, to be honest. They're usually super nice, frankly speaking. There's kind of one here and there that's kind of icky, but compared to some of the Christians that I've had, the Christians can be a bit rude in my comments compared to Islam, but yeah, let's continue.
Which makes them by far Egypt's largest religious minority group. And with a population of around 11 million in Egypt, they're also by far the largest Christian community in the Middle East as well. Further west of these new religious buildings in the government district is going to be the new Capital Central Business District, with some highly ambitious projects of its own. Among them is the already completed iconic tower, which was built with the help of the China State Construction Engineering Corporation, with a total of 79 floors coming out to 1,293 feet or 394 meters in height. The iconic tower is already the tallest building in Africa, with an exterior shell designed to resemble the crown worn by the ancient Egyptian god Amun as depicted in Egyptian hieroglyphics. But apparently not satisfied with merely having the tallest
vanity. This is all vanity. Bro, the Bible literally says that this is such a grave sin. This is literally all vanity. Vanity, vanity. This is bad. This is such a huge... This whole capital, now that I think about it, is literally just vanity. Like, it ain't, like... It was kind of on my mind. But then, when he literally just talks about the ancient Egyptian god, that is the biggest oxymoron that I've heard. Because first of all, in both Islam and Christianity, worshipping any other god in any way, shape, or form is... God does not like that. God does not like that. Okay? God does not like that. God does not like that. Both Christianity and Islam, it literally tells you any other way of worshipping any other god, bad. So this is the biggest oxymoron. And if you don't know what oxymoron, just a fancy way of saying this is super ironic. It's an oxymoron because he's talking about how Egypt is building a super huge church, super huge mosque, and then they're building this in some random Egyptian god. That is such an oxymoron. That is kind of a spit in the face of God, now that I think about it. No, that's why it just like sprung. This is... Oh no, ew. This is actually ew, I'm not gonna lie to you.
Building
this is so ew.
The new
Vanity,
capital's
ew.
planners are evidently still plotting to construct the tallest building in the entire world within the new central business district as well. That'll be called the Obelisko Capital. Taking its design inspiration from an ancient obelisk of pharaonic Egypt, this megatall skyscraper is currently planned to have a total of 165 floors and a total architectural height of 1,000 meters, or an entire kilometer. Construction on the building is currently expected to begin sometime this year in 2024, and if completed by its target finishing date of 2030, it will seize the title of the tallest structure in the world from the current record holder, the Burj Khalifa.
Oh my gosh.
Which will only stand 170 meters shorter than the Obelisko Capital might.
This vanity project is...
massive building will carry with it an equally massive price tag, currently estimated to be at least another $3.2 billion. And even...
What the heck? Yeah, nah, this isn't sunshine and rainbows, bro. Plus, how are you building this stuff? With, like, where are you getting the laborers to build this stuff?
That is probably a big underestimation. And since Egypt is already beginning to encounter some pretty serious financial difficulties, it remains to be seen whether or not this part of the project will actually end up getting built or not. Then there's also the brand new Olympic City complex within the new capital, which is being specifically built to enable Egypt to be competitive when they submit bids to host major worldwide sporting events in the future, like the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. More than 22 separate sporting facilities are being constructed within the complex, including a major new association football stadium that'll have a seating capacity for 94,000 people, which will make it the second largest football stadium in Africa and the 8th largest one worldwide.
Yeah, that's not crazy.
And then in Phase 1 southwest corner is rising the single largest district and building in the
That's the least craziest thing about this video.
entire new capital. The new headquarters for the Egyptian Ministry of Defense, known as the Octagon.
Stop asking research.
Far too important and large to be merely contained within the regular government district of the new capital that houses all of the 34 other Egyptian government ministries. The Ministry of Defense's new headquarters here will consist of 10 new buildings in an octagonal shape that'll sprawl across an area of more than 22,000 acres, which is...
Dude. Oh my gosh, bro. This is like perfect target practice for Ethiopia when Ethiopia and Egypt goes to war. I know about the Ethiopian-Egypt dispute right now.
Independent nation
Oh, I know Ethiopia is taking notes.
1,000 people. The Octagon's floor space across these 10 buildings will include approximately 50.5 million square feet of area under roof, which will make it by far the biggest office building and defense headquarters of any military in the entire world.
Dude,
and with nearly
free real estate.
as much floor space as the Pentagon near Washington, D.C. that serves as the headquarters for the U.S. Department of Defense. This is despite the fact that 1/5 of Egypt's defense budget is provided as a grant by the United States, and even with that grant, the Egyptian defense budget is currently only the 35th largest in the world and is lower than that of Belgium.
Oh, bro. Hold on a second. Wait. So grant? Wait. You're telling me that my taxpaying dollars, no, our taxpaying dollars is going to Egypt now? I didn't even know that. What? American taxpaying dollars is going to Egypt? I feel like I'm misunderstanding this. I'm misunderstanding this.
Which isn't exactly well known for being a military powerhouse deserving of the largest military defense complex in the world.
That's what I'm saying.
That's
what I'm saying. I'm like, what the heck? Egypt? What is Egypt gonna do with that? What are they gonna do with that? Invade a certain Hebrew country? They don't want to invade that country. They're too scared to invade that country. I don't know, the war of Ethiopia? No, seriously, like, what grievances does Egypt have with other people around it? Like, I don't even know.
These districts together will be the Green River Park flowing through the new capital center, designed to symbolize the flow of the Nile River itself through Egypt. In its first phase, undergoing its finishing touches right now, the park will be 6 miles, or about 10 kilometers long, which will make it double the size of Central Park in New York City.
6 miles. That's like, bruh, Barbados is like 21 miles long. Bro, 6 miles, that is crazy.
And when it's extended out to its fully intended size in the future phases, it's expected to reach an almost comical length of 22 miles or 35 kilometers, which will make it roughly 6 times larger than New York Central Park by then.
That is literally a bit longer than... Wow, okay.
Fully residential districts are also planned to be constructed along the park's perimeter, interspersed between wide avenues and highways that connect to the government, business, religious, and sports districts. With other smaller districts I didn't even cover, like an entirely separate sports city, a knowledge city intended to be the site of foreign universities, an arts and culture city, a banking district, a medical campus, an expo city for hosting major conventions, and a brand new big international airport. With all of that being crammed together in here, it's fairly easy to see how it's gotten to the point where the Egyptians have already blown through more than $58 billion building this thing. And it's all coming at a time when Egypt's government debt has soared to all-time highs.
That's not really... Look, dude, America has a huge debt as well. But then again, that's America. America can get away with anything that they want. Because the world revolves around America, almost.
So,
that's actually pretty bad.
Currency has crashed to all-time lows, and the country is facing its worst economic crisis in decades. Tens of billions of dollars are being blown on this extravagant new capital city, while 1/3 of the Egyptian population continues to live in poverty, and the people are dealing with all-time high inflation and an all-time low valued currency. And so, perhaps understandably, there's a genuine concern among many that this flashy new capital arising in the desert is contributing to the bankruptcy of the entire country. And few believe that Egypt can actually afford this scale of extravagance in the desert, and so that then begs the question, why is the Egyptian government apparently so willing to bankrupt itself to build this massive new capital city in the first place?
Tourism.
Officially, the Egyptian government has stated that this new administrative capital project is primarily necessary to relieve congestion and reduce overpopulation in Cairo itself.
That's the thing.
Which is very...
I actually have seen, I mean, he's showing it right now, but yeah, I've seen Cairo. Cairo. That is ugh.
A big and crippling issue that the country is actually struggling to address. Egypt's true shape isn't really what you see it as on maps, because
It's
most
the
of
whole
country
Nile.
is
I do
dominated
know
by
that.
the inhospitable Sahara Desert, where
Yeah.
agriculture and life are each practically impossible. Were it not for the seemingly endless supplies of water in the Nile River that carves across this barren landscape and fans out in the north across a delta region that empties out into the Mediterranean, Egypt would likely be as sparsely populated and barren as neighboring Libya, which only has a population of fewer than 7 million people. But Egypt does have the Nile, and the Nile has brought Egypt life for thousands of years. It carves out what is the largest oasis in the entire world, and even today provides an overwhelming 97% of Egypt's entire supply of fresh water.
There's a rhythm in
The Nile Valley and the Nile Delta regions of Egypt are therefore the true cores of the country, and everything else around it to the west and to the east are basically empty deserts that are largely only useful for serving as protective buffer zones of the core. And while the Nile River is very long, it is also very narrow, which
Well,
makes
not
the
bad.
valley and the delta regions combined only about the same area as Slovakia and Europe. But 95% of Egypt's entire contemporary population lives within either the small valley or the small delta regions. And with a total estimated population in 2024 of 107 million people, that's about 102 million Egyptians who are all crammed up into a space that's only about the same size as Slovakia, which is roughly equivalent to the combined populations of all of Spain and Italy. This makes Egypt's core area within the Nile Valley and Delta among the most densely populated and overcrowded places in the entire world, with an average population density across the region of at least 2,000 people per square kilometer. This is Egypt's true shape. And so if Egypt's population density was more accurately measured as being just the density within the Nile Valley and Delta, it would be ranked as the third most densely populated country in the world, remaining only behind the tiny city-states of Monaco and Singapore. And Egypt
And you wanna know what's crazy is speaking of densely populated countries, Barbados is actually extremely densely populated itself. I'm pretty sure it was, I don't even know if it's still, I'm pretty sure it's like top 10 densely populated areas in the Western Hemisphere or something like that. I don't even know, man, but freaking 21 miles long. I see 14 miles long, 21 miles wide. No, it's 21 miles long. It's 166 square miles, okay? That's all you need to know. But freaking hell, almost 300,000 people. Yeah, that's super. I know, yeah, Barbados was super dense. I know that they were comparing it to India levels of population density, man. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's how dense it is. They were even talking about how the island was overpopulated. Which is funny because I personally think the island could use a bit more population to boost its economy.
population has been growing rapidly for decades now. 74 years ago now, back in 1950, the entire Egyptian population nationwide was only a little more than 21 million people. And within a single lifetime since then, the country's population has exploded more than 5 times over again to the current estimated population
How?
of
Why?
7 million.
What the heck is so great
largest
about
population
Egypt?
in the Middle East, and it's only expected to continue growing even further from here.
Bro, what the
for
heck is-
several more decades to come.
What?
As of 2023, the fertility rate in Egypt has remained well above the world average and continues to sit at around 2.8 children per woman. And though it has been decreasing with time, Egypt's population is still projected to climb up to 160 million people by the middle of the century in 2050, which will only add further population strains on an already very overcrowded country. For an American perspective, Egypt's projected population density in the Nile Valley and Delta by 2050 would be almost like cramming the entire combined populations of California, Texas, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio all simply into the state of West Virginia. Cairo alone, the current capital and largest city, has swelled almost to the breaking point with people, having more than 9 times its population since 1950 to the point where today, the city's metropolitan region is home to more than 22.6 million people. More people than were even alive across all of Egypt back in 1950, and which makes Cairo the most populous metropolis in Africa and the 5th most populous metropolis worldwide, having just recently surpassed Mexico City to clinch the number 5 spot. And it will climb up several more spots further in the near future. At the current projected levels of growth in Cairo, if nothing is done about it, the city's metropolitan region is expected to soar up to around 38 million people by 2050, about the same population as Tokyo has today. By then, Cairo will likely be the second largest metropolitan area in the world, remaining only behind the UN's projections for Mumbai in India, which is likely to by then become the #1 largest city. Cairo has ever since become almost synonymous with brutal traffic and congestion, to the point where Cairo sometimes hardly even functions. The government's ministries
Dude, what is Egypt's economy primarily made up of, aside from the Suez Canal, obviously?
were built spread out across the city back when it was much smaller and less congested decades or even centuries ago. And around Cairo's central Tahrir Square are many of the government's most important buildings, such as the Parliament, the Ministry of the Interior, the Ministerial Cabinet, the United States Embassy, the Supreme Court, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Since security around and between all of these buildings is often necessary and streets are often cordoned off, it's sometimes literally impossible to travel between two separate points in the city, which makes government operations and economic activity both monstrously inefficient. But the problem is that Egypt doesn't really have very much available space to build new housing to pull the population away from Cairo. They have precious little available farmland to the north of Cairo in the Nile Delta or further south through the Nile Valley, which eliminates large-scale urban expansion into either of those directions. That leaves the other unattractive choice of expanding to the east or the west of Cairo into the Sahara Desert. But since it's a less terrible option than expanding north or south and destroying preciously limited agricultural land, that's what the Egyptians have tried doing for decades. The outskirts around Cairo are littered with the attempts of previous presidential administrations in Egypt to build new cities to pull population away from Cairo, like the 6th of October city to the west, the 10th of Ramadan city to the northeast, Al Abor city, and the biggest project before the recent new capital project, New Cairo City, established in 2000 that's today home to 1.5 million people. But hardly any public transportation was built linking any of these new satellite cities in the desert back to Cairo, while most of the housing supply in them was dedicated only to higher-end housing. So the only Egyptians who could relocate themselves out of Cairo into them were higher-income citizens who own cars, which aren't very many people, which is why all of these satellite desert cities are only partially inhabited and have considerably fewer residents living in them than they were originally designed for. But Egypt's current president, Abdel Fattah
Don't you love that? Wealth inequality? Don't you love that? It's funny, because America has the highest wealth inequality in the developed world. 80% of the wealth doesn't go to the people.
Sisi has been repeatedly vocal about his belief that Egypt's overpopulation problem is the biggest crisis the country is currently facing. In 2017, his government rolled out the 2 is enough campaign in Cairo, encouraging Egyptian families to limit themselves to only having 2 children. El-Sisi has also praised China's infamous one-child policy during speeches in the past, and he has tasked his own government to reduce the nationwide fertility rate down from the current 2.85 to just 2.11 by the early 2030s. And in addition to reducing the country's fertility rate, El-Sisi has also become the latest in a long-running line of Egyptian presidents to try his hand at building a new city beyond Cairo to relieve the city of some of its dense population and congestion. Which is why El-Sisi's government hopes that the new administrative capital project that they're building out in the desert will eventually be home to 6.5 million people. But relieving congestion and overpopulation in Cairo is really just the publicly stated reason for the whole big project. The other, more quiet and less official reason is to reduce the odds of El-Sisi and his authoritarian military regime from getting overthrown during a revolution or a coup d'etat, while simultaneously enriching himself and his supporters along the way.
Of course, there it is. The actual reason. Also, this answers my question on whether Egypt is a dictatorship or not. Of
Egypt
course.
was a pretty unstable place politically. The country had been ruled for nearly 30 years by a single longtime strongman leader named Hosni Mubarak, who had by 2011, for a variety of reasons, fallen out of favor with most of his people. Protests against his continued leadership gathered in Cairo's central Tahrir Square, nearby to many of the Egyptian government's most important offices. And the protests steadily evolved into a full-blown revolution that forced Mubarak from power. The Egyptian armed forces then stepped in to temporarily assume power in the country until a democratic election could be hosted that came the following year in 2012, which saw the Egyptian people democratically elect an Islamist to power from the Muslim Brotherhood Party known as Mohammed Morsi. Morsi then went on to attempt and create a new Islamist-leaning constitution in Egypt, which sparked further outrage in the country and led to renewed mass protests erupting again just the following year in 2013 that were finally taken advantage of by Morsi's then Minister of Defense, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. El-Sisi initiated a military coup d'etat against Morsi and forcibly overthrew him from power. And then, when fresh new elections were hosted in 2014 that were boycotted by all of the country's opposition parties, el-Sisi emerged as Egypt's new president. Part of what had made it so possible for protesters and revolutionaries to overthrow the Egyptian government twice in 2011 and again in 2013 was their ability to mass literally millions of people into Cairo's central Tahrir Square.
Yo, let's talk about that for a second. That's the power of people. That is the power of people. The power of mobs. I don't care what country you are. I don't care what dictator you are. Like, the power of the people will always trump anything. And you know, these dictators, right? They know that. They very much know that, dude. So what they do is, and it's very smart, because it works. Even in America, it works. Although America isn't really like a dictatorship, America is interesting because the political parties that it has, it's kind of the same, but one is slightly tilted to the other side, but they're more or less the same. If you know American political parties, you would understand that. So America is kind of sort of like a one-party ran system when you really actually think about it. But anyways, what these people do, what these dictators do, is they just give the illusion to the people that you can't do nothing about it. They do it in many fancy ways, but I don't want to yap. To be honest, I'm talking a lot in this video. I don't want to talk to it.
Overwhelmed the narrow streets with blockades that eliminated the government's ability to access or even defend its important offices nearby, which forced the government into conceding to their demands.
Yeah, exactly.
It was how el-Sisi rose to power in Egypt in the first place. And learning from the mistakes of his predecessors, it wasn't a coincidence that within a year of him securing power with the presidency in 2014, el-Sisi announced the plans for the brand new capital city in 2015. By the time it's eventually finished, there will hardly be any government power remaining within Cairo at all. All of the government's ministries, the parliament, and el-Sisi himself will have all relocated themselves 23 miles, or 45 kilometers east of Cairo.
Wow.
All of that distance between themselves and the tens of millions of everyday Egyptians left behind. In order to replicate the successful revolutions of 2011 and 2013, millions of Egyptians would have to travel out of their way from Cairo to the new capital. And since only around a quarter of Cairo's population even owns a car, that means that most of them are going to have to travel by foot, which will take about 13 hours to walk across the Sahara Desert, with likely multiple military checkpoints placed all along the way. And then, to complicate any potential rebellion's odds of success in the new capital even further, the new capital is being designed in a way to make any protest there as difficult as possible. All of the roads and avenues are designed to be as wide as possible to make barricading them as challenging as possible, a design that replicates many other capital cities from around the world. More than 6,000 security cameras are intended to be installed within the new capital city that is directly inspired from Chinese government surveillance.
Yo, I was literally just about to say, bro. I'm like, they're taking inspiration from China. I was literally about to say that.
Central command
bro.
That'll track everything going on in the capital at all times through the thousands of cameras' live broadcasts. The city will include hardly any public transportation, which will make moving the masses around it challenging. But the presence of the military's massive new headquarters so nearby at the Octagon complex will allow the entire might of the Egyptian military to rapidly deploy a crackdown against any potential threats. Once completed, the new capital will firmly separate the Egyptian government and head of state from the Egyptian people, like a 21st century version of Versailles. More than 340 years ago, French King Louis XIV made a similar policy decision when he relocated his entire court and seat of government away from Paris towards his new exorbitant palace at Versailles, about 12 miles or 19 kilometers away from the center of Paris. For the next century after the move was made, Versailles acted as the de facto capital of France over Paris, isolating the French monarchy and government from the people they ruled over in Paris and separating their problems from the king. But in the end, the French government's move to Versailles made little difference, as in 1789, more than a century after the move was made, the French Revolution exploded and forced the monarchy and the government back to Paris at gunpoint, where it has remained at ever since.
That's the thing. When people are in a corner, when people have nothing to lose, when you really push people, you'd be shocked what people are capable of, frankly speaking. Sure, the Egyptian government can move their capital, but dude, if it gets really bad in Egypt, to the point where people are literally starving and there's nothing more to lose, and they're in a corner where it's like, well, if I don't do anything, I'm a Ghana anyways. Well, they will get up and they will go all the way to that capital. I'm telling you, bro, people really underestimate what people are capable of, especially in mass. Okay? Like, there's that Assassin's Creed song, "A Million March Will Always Be Stronger Than Any Gun." Freaking from Try Hard Ninja, epic song. Yeah, that's true. Funny enough, this song is actually based on the French Revolution. Heard that song years ago, but that's true. Still reigns true to this very day. Like, like the power of the people. Like you just cannot beat that. Okay, you just can't, and a lot of governments know that. Again, what they try to do is they try to make the people feel like, oh no, we can't do anything. And this is actually a good example of that, actually, in my personal opinion. What the government of Egypt is doing is, well, they're just making the people feel that they can't do anything. But trust me, when push comes to shove, oh, they'll do it, all right.
And like Versailles did for the French nobility in separating the government from the people, the brand new Egyptian capital being built today is directly enriching the government of El-Sisi and his military supporters as well. In the beginning, when the new capital city was announced back in 2015, El-Sisi's government promised that not 1 cent of Egyptian state funds would be contributed to the new capital's construction.
Man.
Investors from the United Arab Emirates were originally planned to finance the entire project, but that original plan ended up falling through. When Chinese investors largely backed out of the new capital project as well, El-Sisi's government was forced to finance the construction of everything through Egypt's public resources by taking on loans, increasing the government's debt, selling state-owned land, and directly allocating parts of the government budget to the construction itself. And after the UAE investors fell through on the new capital, the Egyptian government simply set up a brand new company to oversee the capital's construction going forward, that they've called the Administrative Capital for Urban Development, or ACUD, which is, interestingly, owned 51% by the Egyptian military, and only 49% owned by the Egyptian Housing Ministry. This company is the one who receives most of the government contracts to carry out the grandiose construction projects going on within the capital, and their financials are completely non-transparent and not subjected to public auditing or independent oversight, which is very convenient. High-ranking members of the Egyptian military are significant shareholders, suppliers, or supervisors for the construction work going on, and they're likely all profiting to the tune of billions of dollars off of the work. And since most of the money for the capital has come from Egypt's public resources, this entire new capital city project has essentially been a massive wealth transfer from the Egyptian public to the Egyptian generals and to El-Sisi himself. And as the whole project has become a bottomless black hole for money with more than $58 billion dumped into it already, Egypt has had to take on more loans and more debt to pay for it all as crisis after crisis since 2015 has pounded the country's finances even further. After El-Sisi and the military overthrew Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013, an Islamist insurgency in opposition to the new military regime has been raging in the vast, rugged, sparsely populated, and difficult to control Sinai Peninsula.
I have
the
never
Egyptian
heard
army
of
has
this.
lost more than 3,200 soldiers fighting fighting against this insurgency in the Sinai since it began.
Really?
More than how many U.S. troops were lost across 20 years of counterinsurgency.
Wow. How have I never heard of this?
Insurgency has represented the most major internal security crisis for the Egyptian state to deal with, while multiple external crises have made Egypt's economic situation even worse. There was the COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 that rocked every country in the world. And then Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 impacted Egypt especially hard because of their exports of wheat to the country. Without enough arable land along the narrow banks of the Nile to provide for its own burgeoning population growth, Egypt has been forced to import the majority of its wheat supplies from abroad, which has made the country the largest wheat importer in the entire world. Roughly 55% of the country's wheat supply was imported from abroad. And in 2022, immediately before the war in Ukraine began, about 60% of Egypt's imported wheat was coming from Russia, and another 22% of it was coming from Ukraine. The outbreak of war in Ukraine and in the Black Sea sent global wheat prices skyrocketing and hampered Egypt's access to its usual sources of imports, which rocked the country's economy even further. Then, in early 2023, a catastrophic civil war exploded immediately to the south of Egypt and Sudan, which has sent hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing northward into Egypt. And then in October of 2023, another massive war exploded on Egypt's borders in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, which dealt an even further double shock to the Egyptian economy. Tourism to the country, which usually contributes roughly 8% of the country's GDP, and which provided roughly $14 billion worth of revenues for Egypt in 2023, completely crashed in the wake of the massive war breaking out directly next door in Gaza. While at the same time, the war's aftershocks have devastated another major revenue source for Cairo as well, the Suez Canal. The canal is generally understood to probably be the greatest single asset that Egypt possesses, since in a given year, roughly 12% of all global seaborne trade will pass through it, and the Egyptian government profits off of it by charging tolls and fees on all of that trade to use the canal. In the fiscal year from summer 2022 to summer 2023, the Suez Canal returned an all-time high revenue stream to the Egyptian government of $9.4 billion. But since then, the Houthis, an Iranian-backed faction in Yemen who controls most of the country's major population centers, declared that they would begin attacking Israeli, American, and British merchant shipping nearby them in the Red Sea, in support of their ally Hamas in Gaza. Those attacks have ended up being fairly indiscriminate on merchant shipping from just about everywhere, and it's caused a massive crash in merchant shipping traveling through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, which is
I don't want to talk about this conflict. I don't want to. You see, that's why I'm super silent. I don't want to talk about, that specific Hebrew country. I don't want to do that. I don't want my channel get shadow banned. I don't. I really don't want to talk about that conflict, man. Like, with Russia and Ukraine, is like, you can talk about it, and even then you gotta be really careful what you say. But you could kind of, like, YouTube, you could kind of get away with that. But you see that country right there that borders Egypt, that Hebrew country. Okay. YouTube, America just loves kissing that country, and so YouTube loves kissing that country. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about that. No, thank you. I am not getting shadow banned. No, thank you.
On the Suez Canal to crash by roughly half. As a result of all of these crises piling up on top of each other for Egypt recently, and due to the government's continued drive forward, with plowing tens of billions of dollars into the new capital anyway despite them, Egypt's financial situation has deteriorated to its most dire scene in decades. Since El-Sisi formally became Egypt's president a decade ago, back in 2014, Egypt's external debt levels have quadrupled to more than $164 billion, while the entire government debt, including internal debt, has soared to nearly $370 billion, which is roughly 93% of the country's total GDP.
Oh my goodness! Jeez, man. However, that's kind of not bad. my country, Barbados, actually has a really bad problem with debt. It's really, really awful. Like, super awful. I'm not even kidding. That is literally one of the main reasons why it's kind of unlivable down there. It has a debt of $7 billion owed to the IMF. And it has a GDP of $6 billion. So bad, dude. I always ask myself, what is the government doing with this debt money? Like, it has increased since I've left. So bad, and you it's so awful that the prices there are horrendous. Okay, the prices there are horrendous because they're trying to pay back the freaking debt that they owe, so they have to increase like everything. Jeez, so basic living expenses is horrendous, and income is gonna stay the same. So it's ridiculous, man.
And again, 44% of Egypt's total national debt is owed externally.
Actually, now that I think about it, Barbados is ranked 10 in the world. Yeah, when it comes to debt to GDP ratio, ranked 10 in the world. That's how bad our debt is, okay? To give you an idea just how bad that is, to be top 10, rank 10, there's 160 to 70 countries in the world, depending on what you consider a country. Like, that's really bad, dude.
By comparison,
that's
the
actually
United States
awful.
National debt is currently at 123% of its GDP, a larger percentage than Egypt's, but only 24% of America's national debt is owed externally, a much lower percentage than Egypt's. Many of these external loans to Egypt have come from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, which Egypt now owes approximately $18 billion to as of 2023,
Of course.
which currently makes Egypt the second largest IMF debtor in the world, behind only Argentina. In order to secure many of these loans over the past several years, the Egyptian government was required to devalue its currency many times. 5 rounds of the Egyptian currency being devalued later since 2016, with the latest devaluation taking place just a few days before I released this video. The Egyptian pound, the country's currency, has lost about 90% of its value compared to the US dollar since El-Sisi took office as the country's president, with $1 US now trading on the market for around 50 Egyptian pounds, when it used to be $1 US for 5 Egyptian pounds back in 2016. Correspondingly, these frequent and sharp devaluations in Egypt's currency, combined with unexpected price shocks to Egypt's imported resources like wheat and oil due to the war in Ukraine, have led to skyrocketing inflation in the country, which has peaked at an annual rate of 36%, which are the highest levels of inflation that Egypt has ever seen in its modern history. The cratering value of the Egyptian currency and the country's exploding debt has also meant that as of 2024, the country is spending around 60% of its entire government budget simply servicing all of its debt obligations, all while construction on the glittering new capital has continued on with very little cuts from the original plan being made.
And this is the thing, being from a country where like you physically feel the impact of the debt, I'm like thinking to myself, how the heck are the average Egyptian living of this? Guys, it's one thing to hear about a country having debt, but it's another thing to live in a country with extreme debt. Bro, I've lived in a country with extreme debt. Okay? Oh my goodness. That is no joke. That is no joke. It is horrible. It is just so freaking... It's just bad. It's just really, really awful, dude. This is a little joke, actually. Gonna tell a quick joke here, story. When we first came to America, me and my family. I remember when we were in Walmart and we saw the price of a freaking turkey. Was it a turkey? I think it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a turkey. Yeah, it was a turkey. Pretty sure it was turkey or ham. And we were like, it was like $10. And we were like, what the hell? This is $10? Bro, turkey if I remember correctly, Turkey, my country, would be like $20, $20, or more than that. 20 or more, if I remember correctly, man. So when we saw that it was $10 we literally did not believe it. And we were like, we literally went up to employees. So, so many times, and we were like, is this the correct price? They were looking at us like we were like mad. But yeah, like that. Trust me, bro. Like living in a country with high debt, it's no joke, man. Because like the food, like, basic necessities, all of that is gonna be increased because the country's it's trying to pay off the debt, and it's so bad, dude. And most of Barbados's debt is to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, like you said in the video. So yeah, it's horrible.
Plans for affordable housing in the new capital appear to have been cut, while construction on the monorail line that was intended to link downtown Cairo with the new capital also appears to have been halted as well, which are all maybe features rather than bugs, designed to further separate the wealthy Egyptians connected to the government in the new capital from the poor everyday Egyptians left behind in Cairo. And as recently as December of last year in 2023, Bloomberg economists had ranked Egypt as the second most likely country in the world to default on its debts, remaining only just barely behind the odds of war-torn Ukraine defaulting on its own debt.
That's crazy,
and there's
bro.
few ways for Egypt's current regime to really get itself
crazy.
out of this mess. The IMF has demanded that El-Sisi's military-dominated government begin loosening its own control over the economy to enable an environment for private businesses to thrive. The Egyptian military dominates pretty much every facet of the economy in the country, from construction to tourism to even food production and pharmaceuticals. The Egyptian military owns and operates most of the major businesses in the country's economy themselves.
What?
The Egyptian military has often been referred to as being a state within a state inside of Egypt.
What the heck? Who knew a military could get so complex?
So if the former general turned president El-Sisi was to turn on them by privatizing many of their business interests, they would probably just turn on him and overthrow him and replace him with somebody else. Which means that he's largely powerless to actually adopt most of the economic reforms in Egypt that organizations like the IMF have demanded. Which means he's more likely to keep being dependent on continuing the country's economic doom cycle by borrowing more money from abroad and increasing the debt to pay for servicing the previous debt.
Hold on a second. This is another thing about dictatorships as well. They're also reliant on their military. Like, you can't be a dictator without a military. Like, once the military is not on your side, it's over for you.
Currency into the ground and increase the country's inflation rate, which pisses off the Egyptian public against him even more, which increases his own personal need to have a brand new capital separate from the people who could overthrow him even further, which increases his needs to keep pouring money into finishing the new capital project, which increases his needs for acquiring more loans and starting the doom cycle all over again. It is all by far the worst economic crisis that Egypt has ever faced in its modern history, and people have been predicting Egypt's imminent collapse beneath all of these pressures for years now. But far from collapsing, more money from abroad has just continued gushing into Egypt to keep the country alive and functioning anyway, despite all of its troubles, because to many people on the outside, Egypt is simply too big of a country to ever allow it to collapse, especially right now. Well, economically, Egypt is only a fairly minor power in the Middle East, with a much smaller GDP than Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel. The country has by far the region's largest human population, and a governmental collapse with that many people in this region could cause untold amounts of chaos.
That's what I was gonna point out. I was like, dude, 107 million population. That is comparable to Russia, which has a population of 130.
The Gulf Arab states, led by Saudi Arabia, with the
130 million people, right? Or
tagging along,
180.
have also all been heavily geopolitically incentivized to keep a stable government around in Egypt who they can actually get along with. The European Union market represents a major export destination for tens of billions of dollars of oil and gas a year from around the Persian Gulf. And the quickest and most economical route for all of that oil and gas to take to Europe is through the Suez Canal across Egypt. Without the Suez Canal, the Persian Gulf states would stand to lose untold amounts of money by sending their oil and gas exports to Europe the long way around the entirety of Africa. So a compliant and stable government within Egypt that continues letting them use the canal for cheap is imperative to them. This is a big reason why Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait all became highly concerned with Egypt's government in 2012, when the Islamist Mohammed Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood came to power in the country after the chaos of the 2011 revolution. Like most political
the Arab Spring,
the Muslim Brotherhood advocates for the supremacy of the Islamic faith and government over what they view as secular man-made monarchies like the Saudis, which is why the Saudis, the Emirates, Kuwait, and Bahrain all interpret the Brotherhood as a major direct threat to their own monarchical rule, and which is why most of them have even gone so far as to formally designate the Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. You see, there's a sort of Cold War going on across the Middle East, between the monarchist Gulf Arab powers on one side, led by the Saudis and Emiratis, who are opposed to political Islamist movements like the Brotherhood, and on the other side are the countries who more openly back political Islamist movements in the region, led by the
Middle East Cold War,
Qatar.
I've heard this.
So, when the Brotherhood came to power in Egypt in 2012, Turkey and Qatar were each delighted, while the Saudis and Emiratis were terrified. Not wishing to see Egypt fall into the camp of their political Islamist rivals, the Saudis, Emiratis, and Kuwaitis all backed Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's military coup that overthrew the Brotherhood government in Egypt in 2013. And Egypt's military-dominated government has firmly remained within their anti-Islamist-dominated faction ever since. In order to then keep the country's stability going in the midst of its huge recent economic problems, the Gulf Arab states sunk more than $34 billion into Egypt between 2013 and 2022, in the form of outright grants or oil shipments, and in some cases even effectively buying parts of Egypt's territory. In 2016, el-Sisi's government made the highly controversial decision to legally cede two of Egypt's most strategically located islands to the Saudis, in a move that was largely seen as a way for el-Sisi to get continued Saudi aid and investment for his own mega projects like the new capital in return. The two islands, Tiran and Sanafir, are uninhabited but strategically important because they regulate access through the Straits of Tiran, that are the only maritime passageway that ships can take from Israel's port of Eilat or Jordan's port of Aqaba into the Red Sea and the global ocean. Saudi Arabia has revealed their plans to transform Tiran and Sanafir into a new center of global tourism, complete with a new bridge across them that'll directly connect Saudi Arabia and Egypt together for the first time in their histories. But Saudi Arabia's ownership of the islands will also grant them increased strategic importance in the Red Sea region, and increased influence over both Israel and Jordan as well. And the Saudis haven't even been the only ones buying up strategically valuable land in Egypt to fund the country's government and keep it from collapsing. In March of 2024, just as I was making this video, the United Arab Emirates confirmed that they would be investing a truly massive $35 billion into Egypt for the exclusive rights to develop multiple new projects in the country, including $24 billion for the Emirates' exclusive rights to develop the Ras Al Hekma area on a cape on the Egyptian Mediterranean shoreline, around 200 kilometers west of Egypt's second largest city, Alexandria. The Emirates now plan to transform this area into a massive new seaside resort town on the Mediterranean that they hope they'll eventually be able to profit from, while the injection of so much Emirati cash into the desperate Egyptian economy likely averted the country from defaulting this year and facing a catastrophic new crisis. It represents the single largest foreign investment ever put into Egypt in its entire history, and it represents more money than the Gulf states collectively poured into Egypt for a decade between 2013 and 2022, which is perhaps a sign of how dire the economic situation had truly become in Egypt. And the Emirati cash for Egyptian assets like Ras Al Hekma hasn't even been the only money the country has received recently. Egypt's stability is important to the European Union too, because the country is one of the primary avenues of refugee and migrant flows into southern European countries like Greece.
About to say that, yeah, of course.
Rather than see the country's economy collapse and the unpredictability that would follow from that, the EU has recently been floating the idea around of an $8 billion aid package to Egypt as well.
That is crazy,
Egypt and its stability is also very, very very, very important to the United States as well. Egypt was, after all, the very first Arab country to ever make peace with Israel and recognize the Jewish state back in 1979. Ever since then, Washington has sought to transform Egypt's early recognition of Israel's existence into an example for the rest of the Arab world to follow, by basically rewarding Egypt as much as possible for having done it. Egypt alongside Israel each became official.
America loves his country. I don't, bro. I want to talk about this. I could say so much, but I don't want to. I don't want to say nothing. I don't want to say nothing.
Pillars of Washington's military strategy and footprint in the Middle East region ever since. Since making peace with Israel in 1979, Egypt has been the second largest recipient of United States foreign aid in the world, only after Israel itself.
Wow.
A whopping $51 billion of that American foreign aid to Egypt has been military aid. Since 1985, all American military aid to Egypt has been considered grants.
Funny how a lot of these well-off countries are countries that are reliant on US aid. They don't build their economies.
That have never been needed to be paid back, and Washington has usually maintained a grant of about $1.3 billion in military aid to Egypt on an annual basis ever since. Egypt's willingness to cooperate with Israel and its possession of the Suez Canal both make it a highly important partner to Washington because the canal enables American warships, including aircraft carriers, to rapidly redeploy between the Mediterranean theater and the Indo-Pacific, which enables American warships to quickly move between threats posed by states like Russia, Syria, or Libya in the Mediterranean, and threats posed by states like Iran and their proxies like the Houthis in the Indo-Pacific. Moreover, the Suez Canal also provides the quickest possible trade route for Persian Gulf oil and gas to reach America's NATO allies in Europe, which has become even more important since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began and European NATO allies increased reliance on Persian Gulf oil and gas in replacement of Russian oil and gas. And Egypt's stability became even more important to Washington after the outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza after October 7th. Egypt controls the only border with Gaza that isn't controlled by the Israelis, and with the war still raging there, and with other potential conflicts that could break out in Lebanon and the Red Sea or with Iran itself, Washington does not want Egypt to collapse into a revolution again that could end up adding fuel to the already burning fire in the region with an unpredictable new government. And so, Washington too has been incentivized to continue providing Egypt with its generous.
Can you not talk about that country,
Washington,
that specific Hebrew country?
Era monarchies,
Please.
May be an authoritarian
Oh my
leader
goodness.
who's burning tens of billions of dollars building an economically destructive brand new capital city in the desert as his country's economy collapses and as his people grow poorer. But he's also predictable, reliable, and most of all friendly to them in a region of the world that is almost synonymous with geopolitics, violence, and instability. And they can take advantage of Egypt's need for cash by buying some of Egypt's assets at bargain bin prices along the way. The area on the map that Egypt occupies and its massive population makes it simply too big for any of el-Sisi's outside allies to ever allow it to fail, which enables el-Sisi and the Egyptian military to continue borrowing enough money from them or selling enough assets to them to continue staying afloat. But it's all a delicate house of cards that risks Egypt's outside backers eventually losing patience or calculating that the costs of supporting Egypt's stability are no longer worth the high price that they're paying. Egypt's new capital arising in the desert is the symbol of this international calculus that considers the value of Egypt's geopolitical worth stacked up against a seemingly bottomless money pit. So long as the equation remains in Egypt's favor, their construction on the megaprojects in the new capital are likely to continue moving forward. But if the calculus ever shifts and Egypt's outside supporters stop sending in more cash, then Egypt's new administrative capital may become tested by the Egyptian people the same way that Versailles was tested by the French people more than 235 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm like, it doesn't matter, bro. Like, put a person in the corner, they can go above and beyond. I'm telling you. This is why I said it early in the video.
Data that goes into producing these kinds of videos.
Is it done? Is it done? All right. Look, man, you made it all the way here. Make sure you subscribe. Okay. Go check out my other reactions. If you got any suggestion, go and comment it down below for me. I am so freaking sleepy. I am even shocked that I was able to provide so much input being this sleepy. Anyways, make sure to like the video so that my stuff stays on the YouTube algorithm. I'm out of here, man. Thank you for watching.